Every conspiracy theory in Assassin's Creed turns out to be worse than the fans imagined. Clay Kaczmarek spent months inside Animus Data until Subject 16 stopped being a person and became a warning, and by 2020, Basim Ibn Ishaq was seeing through Eivor Varinsdottir's eyes without ever touching a headset. That's why today I'm breaking down 8 conspiracy theories from the games that turn out to be true and what they actually mean for the people caught inside them. Starting with the machine everyone assumed just played back the past, the Animus. The Animus is a powerful way to access genetic memories, but prolonged exposure can have dangerous effects. The Animus is a way to study genetic memories, and prolonged exposure can make those memories blend with your own. The official function reconstructs genetic memories encoded in a person's DNA and simulates them as an immersive experience. Walk through Renaissance Italy as your ancestor walked it. Fight as they fought, see what they saw. Abstergo marketed this as a window into the past, and for short sessions, that's accurate enough. Later Abstergo models could even use genetic material from someone outside the user's direct ancestry, letting unrelated operators drop into another person's inherited memories. The bleeding effect is what happens when the window becomes a door. Long-term Animus exposure transfers skills, behavioral patterns, and sensory impressions from the ancestor to the user. An office analyst with zero combat training spends 40 hours reliving a master swordsman's memories, and when they step out of the chair, their hands remember the guard positions. Their reflexes recognize an opening. The evidence supports memory blending under the bleeding effect, but this packet does not establish a documented rewriting of motor control. Clay Kaczmarek Subject 16 is the human cost itemized. Prolonged Animus exposure can cause an ancestor's genetic memories to blend with the user's own, and Kaczmarek became trapped in Animus Data after his death, existing as a hybrid consciousness inside the system's infrastructure. In 2020, Basim Ibn Ishaq relived Eivor Varinsdottir's memories and afterward experienced visions of both Eivor and Odin, blurring the line between memory playback, inherited perception, and active identity bleed. The evidence presented here describes the Animus as accessing genetic memories through DNA, not as an explicitly documented interaction with souls, and it describes reconstructed genetic memories rather than an explicitly objective broadcast of history. What canon also supports is that under the bleeding effect, you can start fighting, thinking, and perceiving like the ancestor whose memories you are experiencing. The interface becomes the instructor. The playback can feel like an ancestor's memories are blending into your own identity. Desmond Miles wanted freedom from an inherited war. The Animus turns inherited memories into an experience the user can perceive, and it can make those inherited memories feel immediate, whether the user expected that effect or not. A buried past can pick up the user's hands and eyes. Once memory can carry a life across generations, familiar names from the past start carrying a second allegiance. Historical figures. Marcus Junius Brutus stabbed Julius Caesar in the Roman Senate on the Ides of March in 44 BC, and if you paid attention in school, you already know that part. What you probably do not know is who helped plan it. Assassin's Creed. Origins puts Marcus Junius Brutus inside the Hidden Ones, taking part in a coordinated plan to assassinate Julius Caesar rather than acting alone. Gaius Cassius Longinus, the other name history remembers from that same conspiracy, is also portrayed as a Roman Hidden One involved in the operation. Both men, dressed up in the historical record as senators with grudges, are reframed as operatives finishing an assigned job. The Senate floor becomes a mission briefing nobody wrote down, recast by Assassin's Creed as a Hidden Ones operation rather than the historical senator-led conspiracy described in the record. The pattern does not stop in Rome. Roll forward about 1500 years, and Assassin's Creed Brotherhood hands you Niccolo Machiavelli, the guy who wrote The Prince, as a mentor of the Italian Brotherhood. That is not a cameo appearance squeezed in for the marketing bullet points. That is a man history remembers as a political theorist getting recast as an assassin leader in the game's Renaissance setting, quietly steering Renaissance Italy from inside the same war Desmond will eventually inherit through a chair and a machine instead of a bloodline he chose. So does that mean every famous face in these games is secretly carrying a hidden blade? The packet supports only selected historical figures being folded into the assassin side of the conflict. Leonardo da Vinci spends Assassin's Creed II building Ezio's gadgets and translating codex pages, but he remains an ally rather than a fighter. The games seem to draw a line right there. using Leonardo as the control case, the historical genius who gets close to the war without ever picking a side in it. That selectivity is the real signal. The reinterpretations make those historical roles feel like unusually good fits. The writers use Brutus and Cassius in connection with a documented assassination, and Machiavelli as a historical figure associated with politics, letting recorded events double as cover stories for a fictional war layered onto the historical record. Rome gets a briefing disguised as a betrayal. Florence gets a war room disguised as a writer's desk. Some viewers may assume that every famous historical ally, including Leonardo da Vinci, secretly belongs to one of the factions, but the games keep at least one name planted firmly outside the conspiracy. Two secret loyalties emerge from the Roman conspiracy, while Machiavelli's role belongs to a separate Renaissance example, each one demanding a different kind of obedience. The same peace. Here is the uncomfortable part. The Templars claim to want peace. Neither do the assassins. That is the actual problem. The assassin. Brotherhood's founding promise is simple to state and brutal to live by. Protect free will while resisting coercive rule and injustice, because the assassins fear that coercive control would lead to dictatorship. The Templar Order's promise overlaps with the assassins on one crucial point. Both claim to want peace. Build a stable, ordered world where suffering gets managed instead of chosen at random by millions of unsupervised people. Both organizations claim to seek peace. They disagree fundamentally on what reaching it should require. Haytham Kenway offers one clear explanation of the Templar position. He tells his son that Templars seek order, and the section presents him as sincere. He is describing exhaustion, a man who has watched enough riots and executions and famine to conclude that freedom left alone eats itself, generation after generation, city after city. Desmond Miles grew up hearing the opposite lesson, from a father who dragged him through it before he understood a word of it. He has assassin ancestry and is a member of the Assassins, and he spends part of his story trying to stay out of Templar hands while carrying assassin ancestry. He inherited this argument the way you inherit debt, unpaid and compounding, with no memory of ever agreeing to the terms. So the Assassins and the Templars want the same finish line. That is the theory, and the evidence for it is strong. Two organizations locked in a documented conflict, both claiming the word peace as their own banner. What they can't agree on is the road, because one side thinks people earn peace by choosing it, and the other thinks people have to be steered into it whether they like the steering or not. That disagreement helps explain the war, dressed up as a difference of opinion about human nature, argued in blood instead of at a negotiating table. Many assassinations and other clashes can be read as that same argument restated with a blade, and wars like that get settled with proof. The kind that may be hidden where nobody thinks to look. Eden's pieces. Excalibur is real in this world. It sits in an Isu barracks underneath Stonehenge, left in an Isu facility beneath a prehistoric monument later covered in legend. The sword in the stone legend may be the kind of human story later attached to an artifact people could not explain, but the packet does not establish that as canon. Desmond Miles has to walk into these places carrying centuries of somebody else's memory, and the landmarks tied to his search turn out to matter to the plot. That's the weight the whole bloodline hands him, an actual inheritance with coordinates attached, not a metaphor scrawled across a family tree. Start with Jerusalem. An apple of Eden was hidden in the ruins of Solomon's temple, buried under a city that three religions already treat as the center of the world. Excavating beneath the most contested sites in Jerusalem is highly sensitive, even when archaeologists are trying to recover ordinary ancient artifacts. Two sites are established here: Stonehenge and one of the most contested and politically sensitive sites in Jerusalem. The wider lore also describes a Shroud of Eden hidden in the Tower of London, a key to that cache hidden separately inside St. Paul's Cathedral, and a newly built vault beneath Buckingham Palace where the cache was relocated in 1847 after Prince Consort Albert found it. Somebody signed off on the stonework of a royal vault built to hold a first civilization artifact. Somebody kept the plans out of the public record for over a century. Two of them are verified in the evidence here: Stonehenge and Jerusalem. Every one of these places is somewhere tourists photograph without knowing what might be underneath, and that could be one reason a hidden network remains undiscovered. Here's where it's important to separate confirmed sites from speculation. The idea that every famous landmark in these games hides a piece of Eden is tempting, but it is speculation rather than an established rule. Notre Dame de Paris has no confirmed artifact tied to it. Treating every recognizable skyline as a vault turns a documented pattern into a guessing game. The strength is in the specific sites, 2 of them confirmed by name, and stretching that pattern to any monument a game camera happens to pan across just waters it down. One reading of these confirmed sites is that power in this world can hide behind places a culture already treats as significant: a prehistoric monument, a holy city fought over for millennia, someplace people may hesitate to dig under, perhaps because digging beneath places of deep cultural or religious significance can be highly sensitive. Reverence might be the lock, and history has been quietly handing out the keys for centuries. Once the artifacts discussed are tied to specific locations, the question shifts toward the institution using that network in the present: the Templars. You do not need to describe the Templars as controlling every government office to explain their influence. That is part of the actual shape of the modern Templar order. Abstergo Industries serves as its corporate front, and it is a lot less cinematic than robed men in a candlelit chamber, but it fits the corporate front described in the lore. Abstergo Industries was founded in 1937, and it has spent the decades since building itself into a multinational conglomerate with a major focus on pharmaceuticals and technology. Its labs fund genetic research. Its subsidiaries own newspapers and television networks. Its consultants advise politicians, at least in the version of the story this section is telling. The company is the visible skeleton of an ideology with a long record of arguing that humanity cannot be trusted with its own freedom. Warren Vittich explained that argument directly to Desmond Miles. A useful way to read the lore is as a long-running operation to influence political and economic institutions, Templars threading themselves through elected governments, advisors, donors, the quiet men in the room who can influence politics without running for office. The stated goal, repeated across the games, is a new world order built through control of the institutions that shape society. One ideology, 0 official title required to steer any of them. The theory has to be handled carefully from here. The canon supports deep infiltration and enormous influence across those institutions. The evidence supplied here does not show that every prime minister and president on the planet answers to a personal Templar handler, and the games never fully close that gap themselves. What the evidence does support is narrower and somehow more disturbing. You do not need direct command over a government to pursue influence through a corporate front. Abstergo Industries gives the Templar Order a boardroom, a research division, and a route into political power, and none of it required a single throne. Decades of corporate growth built Abstergo Industries into an empire that never had to conquer anything, because everyone it needed was already on the payroll one way or another. Abstergo Industries reveals a system built to manage human behavior at scale. That history is darker still. The Isu created technologies to enforce their control of humanity. Project Anthropos. Every creation myth eventually asks who made humanity and why. Assassin's Creed identifies Project Anthropos as a scientific effort by the Aesir branch of the ISU to create the human race, and the Project Anthropos record reads like a hiring document written by a society that intended humans to serve as a subservient workforce. It started with an existing primate line, rebuilt gene by gene into something specific, a workforce. Homo sapiens came out of that program engineered for compliance, built to labor without asking why, shaped from the start to serve the Isu civilization as a subservient workforce. Homo neanderthalensis were also described as artificially created by the Isu during Project Anthropos, built to serve as a military force. That means the Isu were not documenting just one kind of human. They were running a production line, and the record clearly shows at least 2 entries. The documented purposes included the worker and the weapon, and neither role came with a vote. Sit with what that means for the human conflicts that came later. Desmond Miles travels through the eras of the Crusade, the Renaissance, and the American Revolution while working toward a pivotal moment, carrying memories that were never his, dragged toward a temple he never asked to find. Project Anthropos pushes the timeline back further than that. It pushes the story back before recorded history to when the Isu were engineering humans for their own purposes. It was a specification handed down from the lab. The result was not simple obedience. A species built to follow orders was still capable of far more than simple obedience. The Isu wanted labor, but the resulting workforce was not completely subservient. That's the tension in the blueprint. The Isu engineered obedience, but humans still rebelled, because the Isu's engineered obedience did not prevent humans from eventually rebelling. The record makes the power relationship plain. Humanity started as property, and those humans eventually rebelled against the Isu. The record does support one clear contradiction. Humans were engineered for obedience, yet a human rebellion followed. That's the part worth sitting with. The species built to obey was never completely subservient, which raises a question that should genuinely unsettle you. If the first draft of humanity could be redesigned through a Project Anthropos, what stops a later hand from making the same call again, generations after the fact, on a bloodline that has no idea it's still being edited? Juno. Juno sought a way to preserve Ada beyond his original body. The method, described in the lore, was not a burial. It involved Ada's biological legacy entering the human gene pool. Ratan Hanhaketan is one assassin. The lore directly shows Juno influencing, granted access to the Nexus where she helped choose his path. Juno's ancient plans included influencing at least some later figures, but the packet does not establish that every assassin in this list was one of her deliberate moves. She spent the modern games whispering through apples of Eden and manufactured visions. After Desmond Miles recovered from the coma induced by Juno's actions, he arrived with Rebecca, Sean, and William Miles at the Grand Temple in Turin, because his death there was the release mechanism for her consciousness. That's the plan Assassin's Creed 3 puts directly on screen, spelled out in cutscenes and dialogue. The far larger project sits underneath it, unspoken, already finished thousands of years before Desmond drew a single breath. So what was she actually building while you watched Desmond walk toward that temple door? Centuries before Desmond was born, Juno performed what the games call the seventh method of salvation on her partner Ida, and it was a piece of biological engineering, not a burial. She rewrote his genetic code into the human bloodline itself, so that instead of dying once, Ada could resurface again and again inside human bodies born centuries apart, carrying his legacy forward through people who had no idea they were someone else's backup drive. The series calls the result Sages, recurring human manifestations of Aida, carrying Aida-related memories or identity across later generations. A working piece of biological software got installed into the species. It kept one Isu identity circulating through human generations long after his original body was gone. Think about what that means for those sages. The packet describes them as carrying an inherited piece of Ada's history, an inherited passenger riding along in a life they otherwise built themselves. That gives Desmond's memory-driven story a striking parallel to Juno's work on Ada, but the packet does not establish that the two mechanisms are exactly the same. Genetics stopped being biology in this universe and became a filing system for identity itself, one Juno had already learned to exploit long before Desmond's ancestors ever picked up a hidden blade. Fans still argue about how far this goes. Some read Juno as the single hand behind nearly every major event in the timeline, others as an opportunist who only ever moved the pieces closest to reach. The evidence here does not settle how far Juno's influence extended, and the supplied evidence does not include a definitive writer statement resolving that question. The seventh method settles one narrower piece of it regardless. Whatever else she did or didn't orchestrate, Juno proved she could turn a person into a message, addressed to a century she wouldn't live to see herself. Aida's identity kept recurring across human generations as a result of the genetic intervention attributed to Juno, without establishing whether Juno ever witnessed those appearances herself, which is its own kind of patience most conspirators never get to test. A plan built across human bodies eventually meets the date written into the sky. The Great Catastrophe. 75,000 years ago, the sky did the thing every conspiracy channel on the internet spent 2012 screaming about, and almost nobody who lived through it survived long enough to explain what happened. That is the reveal sitting underneath every other rung of this video. Fan discussions and wikis offer different accounts of the Great Catastrophe. The clearest version points to a coronal mass ejection that tore through Earth's magnetic field, flipping its polarity and exposing the planet to deadly radiation, and it gutted the Isu civilization along with the humans they had engineered, enslaved, and eventually elevated. Fewer than 10,000 humans survived the catastrophe, and far fewer Isu. Think about that number for a second. A remnant that small could fit inside a single modern stadium, seats and all, with room left over in the parking lot. The buried history stops being background right about here. It becomes a clock. The Isu who survived the first catastrophe left behind more than ruins and prophecy. The franchise's lore describes a later recurrence of the same event, known as the Second Disaster, and inside this fictional universe, the original catastrophe was treated as documented history, not myth. The Second Disaster was set for 21st December 2012, the date attached to the story's modern apocalypse fears. The catastrophe was real inside the fictional universe, even if the public explanations discussed in the script were different. Recall Juno, using the eyes patterns to reach out across time and manipulate humans over the eons. The packet does not establish that every ancestor, genetic thread, or bloodline in this video was arranged by Juno, but the lineage that leads to Desmond Miles is documented. Desmond carried memories that were never fully his, inside a body that had been steered toward a confrontation with that history long before he understood what an assassin even was. He wanted out. He wanted his life back from a war he never enlisted in, and he said as much more than once. Instead, he stood at the Grand Temple in December 2012, at the point where the ISU had predicted a recurrence, and the game frames his final act as preventing that disaster from destroying Earth. He paid for it with his life. Sit with the shape of that trade for a second. A prophecy gets planted like a seed, temples get built to hide a countdown, Juno spends thousands of years reaching through history to move pieces into place, and the entire machine converges on one man standing alone in a chamber with the clock nearly out of time. The Great Catastrophe was a solar event that nearly erased civilization, and the Assassin's Creed lore describes a later recurrence, the second disaster, arriving on the exact date real-world doomsday chatter had already picked out for the end of the world. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more, click the video on the screen now.